Hey, this is Justin from Justin Answer, and we are here as cultural creatives seeking to fulfill our human potential. That's the whole tagline, that's the whole mission, that's the whole purpose. And on that note, I have a author of renown here named Michael F. Schein. Now, he wrote a book called the Hype Handbook. Now, before anybody gets overexcited and says, what is that all about, hype? What are you talking about? Because, cultural creatives, we're all about real. We're all about having, real things. There is a very important reason for it, because there is, of course, the people out there who use these techniques for evil, let's just say. But why not be able to leverage the same techniques for a good purpose? Let's say for a charity, a good cause that you're running, like, I don't know, cats protection is near and dear to my heart because I love cats, as you know. So why not be able to leverage those techniques for good? There's a couple more reasons, though, why he's here today, and I'm going to ask him about this, and hopefully he'll be able to know. And that is that if you know these techniques, let's say you're not into business at all, you're just chilling at home, you should still read the book, because if you know these things, then it's like a protective coating around you. Then all of a sudden you can spot it when it's being done to you in the media or by politicians or by propagandists or whoever it is. And that doesn't mean that you're immune to it. It doesn't mean that you ignore it or you don't like music anymore. But what it means is you can now make a choice. You can say, I still like that. It's still awesome. I've certainly done that. Or you can say, they're using those techniques and they're a bit slimy, so you can stay away from them. So welcome to the show, Michael. I don't know if you thought of that ancillary benefit of a protective coating by learning these methods, but let's talk about that and much more. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I mean, not only did I think of the benefit, one of the reasons I wrote the book was because this thing that I'm calling hype, which we'll discuss, really just has a lot to do with how human beings and groups respond to stimuli. And for a variety of reasons, a lot of the scummiest people are better at it. And it just really bugged me that I was seeing all of these people hawking garbage and convincing people to go around with it, while all of the people creating great creative work, great causes, great businesses struggle with it so much. So I really wanted to make the case that not only can you protect yourself against the bad guys, but you can sort of retool those strategies in a very ethical way. And I honestly, that was my moral imperative for writing the book. That became very, very important to me, especially with the latest sort of things we've been seeing going on in the news and whatnot.
And that's the reason I was drawn to your book and that I read it and that I reached out to you. For disclosure, you did not come to me through an agent, you didn't come to me through any of those channels like some people do. Although, as most people will realize, my podcast is not this stressed out weekly or bi-weekly thing, because I don't want to have to fill these slots with just anybody and just splatter someone on there because he's willing to come on and blather on the podcast. I really want to find people who have significance, who have a high impact, who I believe in, which is why I wanted to at least read most of your book. I haven't finished it, I apologize, but read most of it before having you on here. Because it's so important to me. And there's another reason I wanted you on here, and it's something we can talk about a little bit. And that is that there is someone out there, I think he calls himself the Contrapreneur, or he started this thing where he's basically doing an expose of the techniques of he calls the Contrapreneurs. Now, I happen to know the man who designed and originated the format that this guy is saying. If you see people using this format, it means they're a con artist. Now, there's a fallacy in this young man's life. And I admire the fact that Mr. Contrapreneur is trying to expose people who are taking advantage of people and ripping them off. But there's a fallacy in his logic, and that is that just because someone is using those techniques doesn't mean that they are a con artist. Maybe all con artists use that technique, but just because the technique is in use doesn't mean there's a con going on.
I should also say, I mean, this is going to be controversial, but there's a fine line between a con artist and an entrepreneur. And what I mean by that is we hear these stories that we lionize. Like there's this famous story about Bill Gates selling DOS for $100,000 or something, and then saying, okay, now we got to go design an operating system, so he basically conned somebody.
I heard that.
But because he became Bill Gates and because he had the goods to back it up, he we actually like lionized that story. So I think, I'm not saying you should lie at all, but what I am saying is it's just funny to think about the fact, who is it that we consider entrepreneurs? And it's usually the people who don't have the stuff at the end to back it up. They treat it like a Ponzi scheme where they're selling, and then when you pull the curtain back, it's the Wizard of Oz is just an old man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And then there's also showmanship involved in it. I mean,
Right.
look, otherwise Elon Musk wouldn't have gone on Saturday Night Live, would he? He was pretty good
100%.
too. He
Yeah.
was pretty good. But if there was no showmanship necessary in entrepreneurship, he wouldn't have bothered wasting his time on that show. But the real point here is that there are techniques, and then there are how you use those techniques. And the technique in and of itself is not evil, or it cannot be evil. It is neither good nor bad. It's the use that you put to it. So just because somebody uses this format, for example, the entrepreneur guy says, oh, he must be trying to put a con over on you, which is not true. Because again, I know the man who originated that format for presentations, and he's the furthest thing from a con artist in the world. He's a very genuine, absolutely high impact. What you pay is what you get. In fact, he delivers a lot more. So I couldn't endorse him enough. He's fantastic, the man I learned it from. And I will use that. And in fact, guess what? I used it in a context to sell the autism strategy for the city council over here. So I picked that format and I borrowed it across industries, from the whole sales and marketing and this and events, to let's try and sell this strategy for a 3-year strategy. It's already finished now, but this 3-year strategy to help, some disadvantaged people in our local community. And it worked brilliantly. So it's the use that you put it to. Now, would I have been successful without that strategic framework? Maybe, maybe not. And that's what I think is really important to learn, but also to use. Obviously, ethically is my preference. So let me ask you a question now about you. So what's been your biggest challenge in business, and how did you overcome it?
I mean, there are so many, but I think the biggest challenge was that I really never thought of myself as a business person. I mean, I think maybe that's why I was attracted to ideas like this. We get in our own heads so much. So, I mean, excuse me, I always was or at least saw myself as kind of an artsy type kid. Like I wanted to write novels. And after that, I was really interested in like music, but like rock and roll and punk rock, and wanted to play in bands. And when I thought about the idea of being in business or going into business, that just really didn't appeal to me. So eventually, just to get a job, just to make a living, I got a corporate job, and I was there for a long time. And I resented it the whole time. But what held me back was this idea that, like, okay, I could write fiction every morning, and make it, quote unquote, that way. But if not, I have to just sort of hate my life in this corporate job. And when I started to like loosen the boundaries in my mind and say, there are these words we put on things, business and this and that and the other, but really it's just a series of side doors. I mean, if I can figure out ways to use my writing and use my creativity and combine that with some of the tools of business, why is that a bad thing? And I did that, and eventually started a business, and ultimately it came full circle and led to me writing a book, which is what I always wanted to do. So, but I think I was always in my own head. I think I was very black and white in my thinking. It was either like be this artist, or languish away in the corporate world. And I think I got in my own way for a long time.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do. I think I've been there myself. So what would you say then is the accomplishment that you're most proud of in business so far?
I'm just proud of going out on my own. I mean, I worked at that corporate job for 3 years. I learned a lot. I had this band in New York, and we did pretty well in every other way besides making money. I mean, we sold out venues, we did this, but I couldn't make a living at it, and we broke up. And I got this job, and I started to do well there because I'm kind of a hardworking guy. And for 3 years, I really learned. It turned me into an adult, but I was there 8 years and it was completely out of fear. And I remember people used to say to me, just send out one resume. You hate your job so much. And I couldn't bring myself to do it. I had this weird mental block. I thought I'd end up in a cardboard box. I don't know. So when I eventually went on my own and became a freelance copywriter and almost went broke in the process, but made it happen. And there have been all these other accomplishments since that have been a big deal in terms of what I would have in the past thought was the biggest deal. Like publishing this book was a huge deal for me. I spoke to a huge audience in China, all of these bigger things. But I think when I think about that initial sort of breaking through the wall and actually having the courage to go on my own, the fact that I'm still doing that 10 years later, I guess I'm really proud of that because it almost didn't happen.
Yeah, and that's you should be. And most of us are proud of the things that, almost didn't happen, but we made it. It's almost like that little bit of a hero's journey type of thing. The book we're talking about, by the way, it's called the Hype Handbook by Michael F. Schein, and I highly endorse and recommend it. Otherwise, he wouldn't be here talking about it. So read it, and as we go along, you'll probably get the flavor for why. So how did having a core strategy for you play into achieving that accomplishment of, because was it pure accident? Was it like Forrest Gump? Oh, I'll start a business. It almost didn't, or did you have a core strategy to launch yourself and make that happen?
So there's this really great book called The Click Moment by a guy named Franz Johansson. And he talks about how all of these so-called core strategies, if people have a core strategy when they start, they almost inevitably fail. And the people who succeed, they make up their core strategy. Like they go backwards. They talk about how they got there as if it was planned all along, and it almost never is. And the reason for that, and he gets into like almost like quantum physics, is that this chaos theory is that everything's random, meaning there are a million unintended consequences to everything you do, and you can't predict the future. So I started with a core strategy. My strategy was I was in the BPO industry in my corporate life, which is business process outsourcing, which is a fancy way of saying we ran call centers, like customer service centers. And so I knew when I was in that job that the writers who understood that industry and who understood telecom, we always had trouble getting them. So I always did the writing, So I had this brilliant idea that I thought was just a no-brainer, a quote unquote, like, how could this fail? I could become like the world's first BPO and telecom copywriter because there was this huge need for that, right? It failed miserably, right? It bombed, but it wasn't a failure because I put myself out there as a tech writer, not a tech writer, actually, a marketing writer who dealt with technology. And even though I didn't become known as that sort of BPO copywriter, I became known as a technology writer. And then from there, that got me a column at Inc. And from the Inc. column, I started writing about Hype. And then people started to like my marketing. So, I think that this idea that we're just blundering around into things, I think it's more important to have a strategy. You got to start somewhere or else you're going to flounder all over. So you should try to fool yourself that you have this strategy that's going to work. Otherwise, you'll never get started. But in reality, what almost always happens is that you see unintended consequences and the people who are successful pick up on them and accelerate on them. And that's most certainly what happened to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's a quote. I don't remember who said it, so I can't attribute it, but I remember hearing it many times about something to the effect that plans change, but decisions don't. So the decision to, become a successful writer, that doesn't change, but what changes is the plans. They go all over the place.
I heard that said a different way too. So Neil Gaiman, the fantasy writer.
Yes, I'm considering taking his master class, which
yeah, I took it. It was fun. It was good.
Was it good?
All right. I mean, sort of. I mean, those master classes are all good, but they're all very broad. It's almost more like seeing Neil Gaiman talk about writing. You know what I mean?
It is, yeah. And I looked at Dustin Hoffman's on acting, and I have to confess that they had pulled it, so it's no longer available. So I had to get it another way. And so I got it another way, enough said. And I watched it, and at the end, I'm like, boy, am I glad I didn't pay for this, because
they're all
because
like
it was exactly that.
Yeah.
It was just like it might as well have been, Barbara Walters interviewing Dustin Hoffman for 4 hours. because in fact,
yeah,
I don't think he's really that good of an acting coach or teacher. He is, of course,
a
one of
good
the world's
actor.
greatest actors
Yeah,
ever. But
right.
as a teacher, I was like, interesting, fascinating for me to watch, especially considering, I was just always fascinated to do it. But I can't possibly do, there's so many of these masterclass
No,
things. But the one I was
but
really considering is the Neil Gaiman one, only just to strengthen my writing
yeah.
game, pun intended.
Well, all that to say, I mean, he made a comment. I forget if it was in the master class or somewhere else, but he basically said he always knew he wanted to tell stories. And there was this mountain that was being a profession that he made his living writing stories. And he would judge every activity by whether it got him closer or farther to that mountain. So if
Right.
someone offered him, I don't know, the lowest level job reading scripts, he might take that because he would get to make some money analyzing story structures. But if someone offered him a higher paying job writing technical copy, he would turn that down because it would take him farther away. So he had
Farther
this
away. Yeah.
broad end objective, but he let himself wind as long as he was getting closer to the mountaintop. And I thought that I think about that a lot. I think that's a really good way to think about goals
I
so that you
agree.
don't
I
get too
agree. I think
chaotic or too rigid, you know?
I've heard it said like that in a very similar way, actually. And in fact, oh, I just realized I know where Neil Gaiman got that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I know where he got that from. Um, and I just remembered where he got that from. There was I don't know if this is too controversial to talk about here, but there was a brief period of time where Neil Gaiman was involved with, and then I think he ended his involved with, I'm not sure, but is involved with
Oh,
Scientology.
yeah, I knew that. I didn't know. Is that where that comes
And
from?
that comes from that because there's a concept that I like, which is the concept of the ideal scene as part of a management structure, which is exactly what he just explained there, which is is it getting you closer or further away to that, the way it's phrased there is
Interesting.
ideal scene. So
That's cool.
I'm one of these, I've been accused of being pedantic. So I'm one of these people that when I remember, I'm like, I remember where he got that from. So as great as Neil Gaiman
That's really
is,
interesting.
that piece of work was not original, but it is definitely some really good advice. And
I
I
think
think,
Scientology people wouldn't be attracted to. I think as a motivational, philosophy and a set of, some of the positive thinking, self-help stuff in there is really good. It's what's controversial is how they treat their people as, money spigots. You know what I mean? Like how
I kind of do,
they'll
but I
wring
kind of
every
don't,
dollar.
because
Yeah.
do they really? It's a lot of it is how much of that is
Yeah.
spun in the media, and how
It's
much of
hard to
that
know.
is
I'm not
true.
an
And it's,
insider.
I
I
think,
don't really know.
without
I really don't
knowing
know.
the
I
way
don't
it
know.
really works, I think it's tough to judge like that. So I try to refrain from passing judgment, because do we really know? Because
I pass judgment actually. I mean, I take from anything I can find, and that's kind
yeah,
of
me
back
too.
to this book. Like if I found a propaganda artist, if I found something from Martin Luther King, if it was the same organizing principle, I would learn from it. I
Mhm.
think where it gets in trouble for all of these philosophies, from the Ayn Rand stuff to some of the new woke movements to evangelical Christianity to Hasidic Judaism, is when you have to follow A, B, C, D, E, F, G all the way through Z. And if you don't, you're a heretic. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
You can't be like Scientology. If someone is taking you away from the beliefs, they're a suppressive person and you have to cut them out of their life. That's where it starts to get hairy. So that's why I tend not to be an ist, Scientologist,
Sure.
right.
Not to associate with that, but what I mean is even that, which I've heard, of course, in the media, I know people who will say, well, that's not true. I mean, I think, in fact, a couple famous marketers online, like Grant
Yeah.
Cardone and stuff, will say that's not true. That's not maybe some people used that or did that, but that's not forced upon you, and it's not something that we
Right.
require. He says, I have friends, and in fact, in his last 10X Growth Conference, he interviewed some people you wouldn't have thought really meshed with that philosophy, and yet he's totally open to it. So again, I'm with a grain of salt on that.
You got to take grains of salt with everything. You know,
everything,
I think you just got to. Yeah, I agree. So anyway,
exactly. So about the so now that we're on the topic of the presentation, of people presenting themselves and all that, so would you share with us what are 3 to 5 key skills, moves, or techniques that protect against failure, or from the book, basically, maybe three things that we might learn in there that we could actually take away today?
Yeah, so it's worth giving a little bit of background about what this book really is. So it's called the Hype Handbook, and the subtitle I'm going to read because it's almost more descriptive than the book, but it's so long I can't even remember it. But it's kind of on purpose. It's like a Borat style title, but it's 12 indispensable success secrets from the world's greatest propagandists, self-promoters, cult leaders, mischief makers, and boundary breakers. And I bring that up not to plug my book, although that is certainly part of it. But I bring that up because what I did in figuring this out is I was pretty good at this thing called hype. And I would always look at unconventional marketers. We already touched on that, right? Like, instead of looking at the latest online marketing course, I would say, okay, well, how is it that everyone, you know, the Grateful Dead, Tony Robbins, and Andy Warhol all get people frothing at the mouth, you know, crowds of thousands? What is it that they're doing, right? And I would study that. And so when I decided to write the book, I said, you know what, I'm going to read all of these books on everyone from propagandists to cult leaders to really strong business people to people who led causes. And I want to find out, are there things that unify them all? Because if these people are just naturally good at, and when I say hype, all that means is any set of activities that gets a large number of people emotional so that you can move them to take a certain action, right? So is it just that certain people are naturally good at that? If so, there's no strategy. You just got to figure it out. You just got to develop the skills,
or be born with it,
even better. I mean, even more scary, but possible, right? Or it could just be that you know, learn, you know, you just sort of get better, trial and error, this and that, right? Or are there deep psychological principles that repeat over and over again? Are there things that human beings, because of the fact that our brains are not set up to respond accurately, they're set up to help us survive, and also because we're the most social animal in the history of the earth, beyond ants, beyond anything, you know, and we can talk about why that is. Are there things that we respond to time and again? It turned out there really were. There are just like 12 ways to get people to respond the way you want them to, that are based in how we react. So all that being said, there are a few that I discussed that are sort of the cornerstone concepts. So one is, human beings are much more easily attracted to and energized by being against something than they are being for something. And obviously that's the tendency that's behind our racism and sexism and bigotry and nationalism, and certainly not encouraging that. But the reality is that's the way we are. So I remember working in the Brooklyn writers space, which is this community for as you would think, serious Brooklyn writers, and everyone in there is a little bit, you know, quite liberal, you know, not a lot of makeup, not a lot of flaunting of material goods, you know, they work at the food co-op in Park Slope, you know, so they're obviously not very commercially minded people. But do you know how many PCs were in that place?
PCs as in computers?
Computers to write on. Of all the people in there, 0.
Oh, really?
Everyone
I was
had
going to say
Apple.
12.
Zero. Because these non-brand oriented people are so against being a corporate drone and being, you know, that sort of thing, that they'll buy an Apple as their signature flag to show that they're not commercially minded.
I see. Yeah, I have an Apple.
Yeah, so do I. But my point is, they aren't buying that Apple because they love Apple. They're buying Apple because it says something about what they're not.
Oh, right.
It says that they're not the person who fills out Excel spreadsheets. You know what I mean? They're an Apple owner. They're an artist. They're not someone who works on a computer all day. Meanwhile, Apple was at one point the most valuable company in the world. They're as corporate as you can possibly get. So they've done a great job. So think about what they did. They had those commercials when Steve Jobs first came back in like 97 or whatever. it was Justin Long was like the hip Apple Mac guy, and John Hodgman was like the fat, guy with the mustache, with the white button-down shirt, with the stains on it. He was the corporate world, the PC. You don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be that. No one thinks of themselves as the boring corporate guy. You want to be the hip artsy guy, right? So people are very attracted to being against. So it's important to pick a fight. You don't have to pick a fight with a person. I do that, but that can sometimes bleed into being a troll. Pick a fight with an idea. Take a bold stand, and you'll be amazed how people bond around you. Another one is something I call, creating a secret society. So what most hype artists, and by extension, the best promoters and marketers do, is they make it seem like all of their success is happening on a grassroots level. So they make it seem like they're just getting millions of Twitter followers and Instagram followers and whatever. And the scary thing about that is that everyone who admires them tries to emulate them. So they spend all this time tweeting and Instagramming all day and don't understand why they're not growing. Or back when I was playing in bands, they would just put up flyers all day and sort of wonder why they weren't getting famous, right? What the best hype artists and marketers do is they make it seem like that's all that's going on, and they do some of it. But what they're really doing is they're nurturing this group of really close friendships with influential people behind the scenes, and they call on favors. So it's a lot easier to, say to someone who has a 50,000 person following, hey man, we've been friends for a long time. Could you send word out, about my product to this group, and do that 5 times in a 2-month period. And there are ways to do that too. There are ways to start relationships. Like people, especially successful people, like to be known for what most people don't recognize them for. So like, for example, if there's a captain of industry who paints on the weekend, and very few people know that they paint on the weekend, if you praise their painting on Twitter or ask to see their paintings on Twitter, they will open up a friendship with you in a way that talking about their billions will never do, because then they'll just think that you want something from them.
Well, it's like Prince Charles. He's a avid painter and gardener, and he would much rather talk about that than any, gossip or anything else. So
talk to him about that, and he will invite the most common commoner into his drawing room to have a conversation with him that he would never do if you're talking about what's on the docket for Parliament or whatever,
Well, no, he doesn't do government, but I know what you mean.
No. But they do this paperwork stuff. They have to like proceed. The Queen, for example, has to do the speech that she didn't write, for Parliament and sign
then she
off.
has to assent on all the acts
these
and
duties that they do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whatever they are.
They're not very interested in that, but painting and gardening, oh my God.
Even if you are interested, in other words, I'm really interested in my business. But if you're a 20-year-old coming out of school and you come up to me and you say, I'd really like to pick your brain about content marketing, I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, that's an annoyance that I have to deal with. Maybe I'll do it. Maybe I won't, depending on how busy I am. But if you say to me, you mentioned on an interview that you write fiction in the mornings, and you mentioned that you really like Borges, and I'm a huge Borges fan. In fact, I studied him in college. I'd love to talk to you about your favorite short stories. Now, I don't make my living that way, but when you ask me about my business, which I do make my living at, my cortisol levels go up, because I've had people approach me like that who were really just kissing my backside so they could get something from me. I've learned to be on guard about that.
Sure.
But if you ask me about my personal interests, I'm flattered that you took the time to listen, and I'm talking about something I'm interested in. I'll talk to anyone who writes me about that on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, right? And this is just something to keep in mind. I guess a third, there are so many, but a third one is something I call the milk before meat strategy. So religions use this a lot. So let's talk about Scientology, right? I don't know if this is just media or not, but let's just use the stereotype. People say that when you're in Scientology for a really long time, and this has been documented in books like Going Clear by Lawrence Wright, who's by all intents a very good journalist, you learn that Scientologists believe that that our negative emotions come from aliens who lived on the lip of a volcano. Now, I'm not saying that's even a bad thing. Every religion has weird stuff. In fact, that's more believable than some of the supernatural religions. However, if you walk to someone in the street and you said, I could really help you out. There are aliens that live on the lip of a volcano that are infesting your mind and you need to expel them. You'd be like, okay, let me call 911. There's a madman, coming up to me. However, if you say to them, listen, I'd love to tell you about some ideas. There's this mountain that's goal oriented. I can teach you a system for achieving your goals. I mean, you're a business person, right? Are you interested in learning how to achieve your goals better? Yeah, of course. Okay, wonderful. And then you give them a few tactics to help them. Wow, that's really fascinating. Oh, by the way, we're having a meeting. Why don't you come? And it doesn't look like a church. It looks like a self-help seminar, and you learn 3 things that helped your business. Slowly but surely, when they finally introduce the aliens on the volcano, if that's even what they teach, it doesn't seem that weird, because humans are very scared of big changes. We're set up to, when something departs very far from what we're used to, that's like giving a little baby meat. They'll get sick. But if you give a baby milk and then you give them smashed up bananas and then you give them smashed up beef and then you give them solid beef, they don't even notice it's happening. So if you have an idea that's truly groundbreaking or unusual and you try to introduce it all at once and you see people getting worked up and pushing you away, you can introduce the same idea in segments and they'll come along with you. It's just
interesting
that
that you
threshold
say
for
that.
change. Yeah, it's very small.
Interesting approach, because I have heard it described and applied in other areas. Like, I don't know if you ever read the book A Separate Piece by James Clavell.
I did. Oh,
I
no,
read that in elementary school.
A separate piece, but the one about the guy who gets pushed off the tree or whatever.
A Separate Piece is what sticks in my, and I read it now. I'm not going to tell the world exactly how old I am, although I am well over 40 years old. But this was in elementary school that I read this, in the 4th grade. So it's a long time ago, but I have a great memory. So I remember very clearly that it was about a school teacher who very gradually got the students to go from, the Pledge of Allegiance to cutting up the flag, making collages, and eventually adopting a completely opposing political ideology.
Yeah, exactly. That's the strategy.
And the whole strategy was, it was very, very, very gradual, or as you say, milk before meat. But the other application to that, like, for example, in a positive way, is after, is that which proves that, the system just can't take even good stuff to that as a shock.
Good or bad doesn't matter. I mean,
it doesn't matter.
If it's different than what you're used to, that's all that
so
matters.
when they liberated the concentration camps after the Holocaust, and there were obviously some people who were famished, who were, they had undergone starvation, and the soldiers were instructed not to give them solid food immediately.
100%.
Because that would kill them. So they were instructed, why don't you just give them a little bit of soup and gradually build them back up? So in many contexts, this sort of gradual approach is so applicable. But thank you for sharing those 3 really cool tips, I guess, or skills or things that we could do.
I want to say something though. The gradual approach, this is a little bit counterintuitive. If your idea is truly groundbreaking or weird or unusual, you should use the gradual approach. If your idea is common, in other words, a lot of times we're really good at what we do and we can provide a lot of value, but there's not a huge margin of difference. So there are all these like business coaches, and some of them might be fantastic at what they do. But if you did try to describe in words what's different about what they do, there's not that much that's different. Coaching is coaching. If that's the case, you want to do the opposite. You want to seem as theatrical, in other words, use theater. I mean, look at Tony Robbins, right? You go to a Tony Robbins rally or an Amway rally, neither of what either of those people teaches is it could be really useful, but it's not really groundbreaking. I mean, it's all based on stuff that has existed before. They bombard you with lights, with sound, with loud music, with chanting. Another thing to do is use science, what they call ear candy and eye candy. Consultants do this. The most common sense advice in the world, if you put charts and figures and neuroepinephrine and different, big words, suddenly it gives you a veneer of authority that you can't have. Now, not saying this stuff should be bad. What I'm saying
Yeah.
is your grandpa could give you life-changing advice in common sense language, and
Mhm.
you'll be like, oh, thanks, grandpa. And you're not going to
Yeah.
pay him. You won't even treat him to a meal. But if someone says the same thing with charts and
And
figures and
starts
large
throwing
scientific technology, you'll
techno
pay them
babble on
100
it. Yeah.
grand. You know, so it's funny. It's the opposite of what you'd expect. The
Hmm.
more unusual and groundbreaking an idea is, the more commonplace you should
See,
make it, and the least commonplace you should make it more flamboyant.
I have a rather large vocabulary, so I keep trying to be careful not to confuse people when I present or when I talk to them, and potentially I shouldn't be so worried about it because
It depends. No, but it depends. It depends. So if you're in a field, you got to be clear. That's not what I mean.
yeah.
The person who does this best is Simon Sinek, right? So Simon
Mm.
Sinek, and I write about this in the book. Simon Sinek is famous for start with why, and he's a clear speaker, right? I mean, you got to at the core, people have to understand what you're saying. That's not. But what he'll do is, his ideas are honestly not groundbreaking. I mean, he's saying start with why. First of all, that's debatable, and second of all, okay, and it's another way of saying do what you love. You know what I mean? It's not groundbreaking, but the guy makes 100 grand to talk, and he's good. He helps people, right? But watch him. So first of all, if you see him talk, he has this kind of half British accent. He wears these little spectacles. You would think that he was a professor of some kind.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
guy's never done anything besides marketing. He worked at Ogilvy and Mather before he done
Yeah,
this.
yeah. I see. I've gotten past that section in your book.
Right.
So yeah, yeah.
So that's the first thing. And if you hear him,
Interesting.
he did this thing about why millennials are like the worst generation, which is completely debunkable, but everyone just accepted it at face value. And I'm not calling him a con artist. His stuff is fine. It's good.
Yeah.
But he always uses, you know, the dopamine gets fired in the mind and the neural pathways and this and that. I mean, other people just be like, goddamn kids today, they don't know what it's like to make a buck. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
he's like, the millennials, the neural pathways, when they were given, reward systems for, and it's like, yeah, science, and you suddenly,
Yeah.
it's like a doctor coming in a white coat. So this is not an argument for being unclear. It's
Yeah.
an argument for using conspicuous signifiers of authority.
Interesting. Yeah, no. So I'm glad you clarified that, because it's not that I need to just, run roughshod with my geeky language on people.
No one will know what
and
you're
just
talking about.
and just
I mean,
let the
right.
$100 words go. I still need to be clear with them. It's just that I shouldn't shy away from selecting maybe a few of those to surround things and give it an air of authority.
But again, you don't have to say, you don't have to use a $10 word when a $1 word will do. But if you can back up what you're saying with some kind of obscure research that could or could not be used, people will give credence to it rather than if you just said it outright.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Show a chart, show a figure, show a, whatever.
Yeah, and those are easy to come by because I've got those associations that send me all those charts every month. So I could borrow those and start using those and say, well, the Institute of Leadership and Management,
100%,
this, that, and that, quoted and cited, and this, that, and the other thing.
Cortisol is activated in your system, which makes people less likely to buy from you. You notice I said that a few minutes ago, right? I mean, that gives me, that makes, and now it's true, but it makes me sound like an expert.
Yeah,
which is what I was going for.
A bit of a scientist, right? So now that we've talked about a few more of these techniques that you've taught us, how has leveraging these proven strategies affected your earning capacity? In other words, have you used these?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I do for a living. So I was talking about that corporate job I have and how I was scared to leave. And I had that idea that I was going to be a corporate copywriter or a marketing copywriter. And because I was a good writer and because I had some business knowledge, or I shouldn't say business knowledge, industry knowledge, I figured I would just leave my job. This was like 10 years ago. I figured I would just leave my job and start making money. And I had a year's worth of savings and I almost went broke. I mean, I couldn't sell. I didn't know how to sell or really market for that matter, because I people who hired me would rehire me, but I just couldn't get a steady flow of leads. So what happened was I I thought back at a certain point. It was actually funny. I walked by the old club that we used to play at just randomly. The neighborhood changed a lot. So I was having a meeting with a friend of mine who was a consultant in the Lower East Side. It's all like bankers and lawyers now. But back when I was playing in bands, it was like where all the rock and roll stuff was happening. And so I walked by that old club, and I remembered how we used to sell it out all the time, like on a Wednesday night. And we would do it by hyping stuff up. We never used the word marketing, but we would do things like for example, we talked our way onto Showtime at the Apollo because we knew we would be booed off, and then we got all kinds of press around that. So we would do things like that all the time. And we're really, and I particularly was really good at it. And I was like, why am I so bad at marketing now? And it was because I had become corporate. I was studying A/B testing and sales funnels and this and that. And I forgot that at the core, attracting attention and getting people emotional is about really deep psychological stuff. It's about benevolent mischief, So I said, you know what, I'm going to change my approach. I mean, I'm going to try to use this. And I did. And it worked like a charm. I mean, I started doing kind of benevolently mischievous stuff and taking on that puckish sort of role. And I started doing really well with the writing business. And then it turned into an agency. So what I do is I'm a big reader, but I'm not, everyone's a big reader now. That's like a big fad. And I think that's a great fad. But at the same time, it's like everyone reads the same kind of business books. And I think they're worth reading. But like, I also think there's a lot of other great stuff out there. So I'll read these obscure books on like crowd psychology or like brainwashing, or I'll read, biographies of these really unusual, counterintuitive people. And then I'll conduct experiments. And my rules are it has to be ethical and make people's lives better. You know what I mean? And there can't be deception involved.
Yeah.
And if I hit those two rules, I'll do these little experiments. And if they fail, I'll discard them. But if they succeed, not only do they become part of the package that we use for our clients and for ourselves, they become one of the strategies I teach, in the book and in workshops. So yeah, I mean, it's all the money I've made in the last decade has to do with this stuff. Yeah.
That's cool. And now you're passing it forward with this remarkable book, the Hype Handbook, so that we can all take advantage of that in an ethical way, please. I mean, it's only a request. We can't police it. You can obviously use it to con people and create nastiness. But
what I should say, the reason I feel comfortable putting this book out there and knowing it'll be used ethically is because, frankly, the bad guys already get it.
That's true.
They've done experiments on people with antisocial personality disorder. And that's this basket of disorders that includes like malignant narcissism and psychopathy and sociopathy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they've put them in laboratory conditions where they're in stressful, like social situations. And they measure their vital signs and their heart rates don't go up. Like most people, when we're in stressful social situations, we get our pulse rate goes up.
Palpitates,
They don't have that. So basically, it's not so much that these strategies are bad. In fact, it's not at all. It's that people who are antisocial don't let their emotions get in the way. They can see people as chess pieces. So they'll say, if I do X, Y, and Z, I'm going to get this from someone. They can just do it. So the worst people in the world almost always are good at manipulating people, but they're also always good. They're good at interpersonally, moving people and getting them to do what they want them to do. That doesn't mean the strategies are bad. Quite the contrary. They're just the way the problem is that the rest of us, because we don't like those kinds of people and don't want to be like them, and because we get emotional in interpersonal situations, we veer away. And then we tell ourselves lies like, well, as long as my work is good, it'll rise to the top and get noticed. And it's not true. We just want to believe it.
And the other thing is we get duped
I'm not worried.
by them.
We get duped. So I'm not worried. I don't think the people I think the people who need this book are going to learn it, and they're not going to use it for evil because they have too much empathy for that.
Exactly. And the people who, don't need it, this is a handbook for the rest of us. It's not for
That's
the
what
it's
it
not for the
is.
2% psychos that Hannibal Lecters that can, carve you open without having even a heartbeat,
Beyond Hannibal Lecters, I mean, I think I can name a few internet gurus who they're not killing people, but I would say that they're selling useless products and have a clan around them.
Oh yeah, I can
And,
name quite a few of those.
and I would expect just from the way they talk, I'm not a psychologist, that they have narcissistic personality
Sure.
disorder.
Have you ever read the book The Sociopath Next Door?
I've heard about it. I've never read it. I heard it's
It's
fascinating.
since you're a reader,
Yeah.
you might enjoy that because that
Yeah.
that really corroborates everything you're saying in that, especially what you just said, which is like they're not the people that the people you're talking about, probably similar ones to who I'm thinking of. They're not the kind of person you think, oh my God, it's Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll have his liver with a nice Chianti and they're not like that. They're really charming, cute. They've got a massive following, much bigger than my own,
And they don't
you know
harm people on a deep level. They just don't, they take money, they take
yeah.
advantage of people,
They take advantage. They
basically.
take money and
Yeah.
they don't deliver, something remarkable. They deliver
Yeah.
something that people, I guess, kind of like or whatever, but they're not delivering the transformative promises that money should be earning them. So anyway, what was the so we talked about more strategies and reasons behind them in the book. So what's the best strategy you ever learned and what impact did it have on your business?
It's not a function of the best because they all interlock. I would say that
Mm,
there's one that the rest depend on. It's that make war not love thing about the drawing lines in the sands and picking
okay.
fights. I mean, if you don't have a strong point of view, if you can't say this is what in my world I stand against, almost none of the rest of it works because you'll be generating energy around nothing, right? So like, in other
Hmm.
words, what I would do, and I tell my clients this, the first thing you should ask yourself is what is a point of view commonly held in your corner of the universe, whether that's your industry, your scene, whatever, like that all of your contemporaries seem to believe very strongly that you secretly think is bunk. Because if you can go out with that, that suddenly makes you a guru. So I'll give you an example. So the first thing I did that the thing that I did, that hype tactic that I accidentally did that started building up my career and led to everything else. And I tell this story all the time, but it's a really good illustration of this. Gary Vaynerchuk, who I think is a really good business person and I have nothing against, especially Wine Library. I thought that was actually a really strong value adding kind of business. But when he became an internet guru, I heard him constantly going around with this advice to hustle, hustle, hustle. So, and
Mhm.
constantly like telling people who already worked hard, screaming at them that they needed to tweet from the toilet at 3 a.m, that they needed to, in their 20s, not have a girlfriend, not have a life, just like work and, this. And I was like, not only do I think that's a terrible way to live, but let's put that aside. I don't believe it because I see, first of all, the guy's got 300 people working for him. So he doesn't do all the tweeting. But even if he did, what if his company sold wine at one point? What if you're making the wine? Should you be on social media 24 hours a day, or should you be paying attention to to finding the right grapes, right? So I didn't believe it, but you would see all these young people and no one disagreed with it. Gary V, hustle, I'm a hustler. Da, 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 da. So I was writing for Inc. at the time, Inc. magazine, and I wrote an article, which I was scared to write, called Why Gary Vaynerchuk is Flat Out Wrong. And I was very respectful. I mean, I said he's a great, all the things I'm saying now. I wasn't a troll because I think he's smart as can be, smart as a whip. And I don't think he's one of these people who doesn't deliver value. I think he does. But I think his advice that all of these people were virulently following was bad advice. And what I said was, if you want to, this guy is such a good self-promoter that if you want to be successful, don't listen to his advice, follow what he does. Because when you get people to work really hard on behalf of your cause, it binds them to you. So I said that publicly. That night, he responded to me personally, and I was a nobody, and he responded to me by video and just chewed me a new one, And then all his followers started calling me on Twitter lazy, an idiot, and this and that. And I was like, what did I do? I ruined my career. But by the next day, I had all these new followers, and it turned out that there were all of these scattered people who felt the way I did, but there was no organizing principle. There was no leader. And now by me saying something, it was like the emperor's got no clothes. It was like, wow, I thought that too. We got to follow this guy. So if you can draw a line in the sand and stand against a common view in your corner of the world, you'll be amazed. If you really believe it, you know what I mean? You'll
Yeah.
be amazed by how many people will
And when I think about it, I was about to say, and it should be something that is, moral and ethical. It should be something in general good, but
I thought that was really ethical. I mean, I thought
yeah,
his
totally.
advice was harmful. I mean,
I agree. But what I mean was that what I was going to say was that I've actually noticed that there's some really out there ones that I wouldn't particularly consider moral or ethical, and yet they have amassed a little following
well,
around
what
them
do
of
you think? I
like-minded
mean,
people. So there's that politician, I forget, down south, who's like an outspoken, for child, consent and pedophilia and all that. But in the sense of
there's a
he,
politician who believes that.
yeah, in the south somewhere, I forget where exactly. All I remember, he's got blonde hair and this, and he's really out there then, because he really is wow. So some of the stuff I would consider, jail bait, like go to jail for even thinking that. But he's got a relatively small, thank goodness, relatively small following of people who agree with that kind of
well, the
stuff.
internet amplifies it, right? So when I heard Bill Burr, the comedian, talking about this, but it's so true. I mean, when we were kids, the earth was round, right? I mean, that was the earth. Everyone believed that, and it's except for a few kooks who printed out like a
Even the
photocopied
flat earthers say
newsletter.
it's
Right. There
around
was
the
this
globe.
little group of flat earthers who my science teacher showed us their photocopied stapled newsletter that about 19 people subscribed to, that believed in this idiotic thing. Now, because of the internet and because the New York Times and the Flat Earth Society website can be designed to look just as beautiful from one another, every tribe is taken seriously. So there are these people who have these cockamamie, I'm not going to just call this cockamamie because it's ridiculous, these cockamamie arguments that the earth is flat. And because of the internet, the virulence through which these contrarian points of view gain die-hard followers, and they can raise money. I mean, all this crazy stuff. It's a lesson, don't do it. Don't spread garbage like that. But like, just observe, that's human irrationality at work. And every single one of us is irrational.
To a degree, yeah, for sure. Yeah, we're not all Vulcans, even they weren't perfectly rational.
We all have the capacity for reason. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is our brains are wired to view the world through the senses and through the way our brains are set up, which is how evolution programmed us to spread our genes and survive. So we have mental shortcuts that allow us to move more quickly. We have biases that allow us to bond with a group at the expense of the truth. And if you think you're an exception to this, you're at the most danger for being taken in, because you don't think, oh, I'm rational, I can't be fooled by this. The easiest people to
You've got a blind spot. Yeah,
that's what I mean. It's if you look at the people who get taken by con artists, it tends to be the people who think they're too smart for their own good.
Oh, I know. I've got many friends like that who have, genius level IQs. They're really, really super intelligent people, and they have been taken in by con artists
because of their self-regard, because they think that they're so rational. Yeah. That if they assess something as true, then it must be true.
And it's dangerous, because then they condemn people who don't agree with them, because they must be ignorant in some way. They must have nescience, and ignorance in certain way, because of their own erudition. See, I'm throwing out the big
words. That's a good word, though.
But the thing is that is exactly what you're saying, is that they have that complete blind spot. And yet when I'm looking at it, I say, man, you were just taken in hook, line, and sinker by that lying, conning politician and you're now defending this position incredibly well because you assume that you're right. And I never assume I'm right. Actually, that's
to get
kind of my
nerdy,
chance.
yeah, to get nerdy for a second, I mean, look at Socrates, right? His whole thing, if you actually read like Plato writing from
Oh, I did read the
Socrates' work,
complete works back in university. Yeah.
I didn't read the complete works, but I've read some things. And if you look at him, it wasn't what I expected. I read it as an adult, you know, and it was like a middle-aged adult. And it was like, he doesn't know anything, and he knows that he doesn't know. He goes around telling people like, you know, hey, you know, and it's actually annoying because someone will say something like, well, I'm a virtuous person. So, well, what is this virtue? Because I don't know what virtue is. I enlighten me, because I'm kind of a silly guy. Like, tell me, and they'll be like, well, it's about doing the right thing. Well, could you tell me what right means? Because I've struggled with it. I don't know what right means. And by the time you're done, he's like, do you know what is means? It's like Bill Clinton. I mean, you know, and it's annoying, but like, he's right. I mean, he's the greatest thinker. He's the cradle of Western thought, this guy. And his whole teaching was like, I don't know anything, you know?
Yeah. His whole thing was really, really funny. I remember that. It's kind of an amusing point. And then you wonder, what did that help his demise? Because ostensibly he was hemlocked. He was hemlocked because of you know, contrarian ideas. But I think also that sort of annoying demeanor probably helped them say, let's just get rid of this one.
There's actually a play. There's a play called The Clouds, which is a comedy, Aristophanes, where it's all making fun of Socrates, and it shows how he was perceived. It's about like, yeah, he was really a nuisance. That one. But yeah, I think though that, to get out of the weeds for a minute, I think real questioning threatens these people. So I don't know how you feel about Tony Robbins, and it's almost irrelevant, but he's a professional guru, you know? I mean, he makes money by getting people into a heightened state and getting them to think he's larger than life. So it was really telling, that Me Too movement, not because of the Me Too stuff. You know what I'm referring to? So this woman got up and said to her, he questioned, because he gives all this relationship advice. Why is he giving relationship? Because he knows about everything. He's like a god. He knows from relationships to money to business, engineering to, you know, the guy knows everything about everything, which it always strikes me as a little weird. So this woman called him out and said, you know, listen, you know, I forget what she said, but basically questioned him. And he gave one of his stock answers, and she questioned him again and questioned him. And he was like pushing her down the aisle. He was so agitated that she didn't just accept his line and prostrate herself before him, you know? And because we're in this Me Too moment, it bit him in the backside. But let's put that aside. When the great man and the powers that be have the little kid saying, you know, I'm not sure you're wearing any clothing. No, really. I don't think you're wearing clothing. No, actually, those aren't invisible clothing, that you're naked. People in power don't like that.
No, they don't. They don't. This whole speak truth to power, I've learned the hard way. They hate that. They do not like speak truth to power. They like to be in their circle of fiction that they've created, that the illusion that they've created, no matter how divergent it is from reality. It could be only a little bit, but they don't like any kind of questioning of, you know, here, take a look. No, they don't like that at all.
But if you can avoid losing your head, that's a really great way to amass power of your own.
Yeah, for sure. You know? I did that once on a very small scale when I was in journalism school at Medill in Chicago, and I was being a recalcitrant student. I did not like the inverted pyramid. I did not like the sort of very forced writing style where it was just like, I also did not like being assigned what to look for. I'm like, I thought I was going to go out and find out what like the truth is, what is the reality, not being told what to. So anyway, so I was no good at it. That's eventually why I switched out of that school. But I was at one point taken out into the hallway and screamed at by Professor Bob McClory, the late Bob McClory, who's a wonderful, kind man. He was an ex-priest in the Catholic Church who left because he fell in love with a nun, and they got married and lived happily ever after.
Like Martin Luther.
Yeah, so it was just, he's a nice guy, always wore sweaters. He was like shaved Santa, you know, with white hair and bright blue eyes. And, you know, so but he took me out in the hallway of that building and just screamed at me, and his face turned tomato red. And one of the reasons that he kept getting irritated was because I was not getting agitated at all, because I actually did not care. I said, look, I'll just transfer out of this stupid major if this is what I have to do. And so he just got so angry, and he, at one point he looked at me and he's like, you're so unflippable, but he was like red and screaming. I'm sure people started looking from other classrooms thinking, is everything okay in here? And that's the thing.
That's
He didn't,
funny.
is I just was like calm, cool, and collected, just looking at him saying, okay, my writing sucks. Okay. Yeah. The grant. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Didn't
You know,
bother me.
we're lucky to be in a country, at least for now, where well, I'm in the United States and England is the same, at least for now, where you can take a bold stand and not get killed for it. So, you know, there's a time and a place. I mean, if you're taking bold stands in an oppressive state, obviously that takes a lot more courage. But, you know, yeah, I mean, if you really wanted to stay in that program, that may not have been the best thing to do, right? But if you're a hype artist or a marketer, like if I had worked for Gary Vaynerchuk and did that article publicly, I would have gotten fired. Or if I depended on him in some way or needed to hire him for a conference, but I didn't have much to lose. And if you can find the video of his response to me, it's very funny because in the beginning, he was very coherent. But by the end, he was basically talking about how successful he was, how much money he had. He was really incoherent. He was kind of sweating. And I think it's because he's really not used to being questioned in that way, you know? And the good news was I have nothing to be scared of because there's enough market share to go around. So all of Gary Vaynerchuk's fans may have hated me, and they did, but who cares? There's millions of people. And if I get half of 1% of them to be diehard followers of me, I'm still not as big as Vaynerchuk is, you know? But I have a really, really, really good career because,
and you might not need or want
you know,
that, you know,
right. So none of these are blanket statements. You need to use, you wouldn't use a butter knife to cut open, you know, a box, but it's really good for spreading butter. Like they all need their, I don't know what that analogy was, but
yeah, I've tried it, and you're right. It's not ideal for cutting a box open.
But you know, a pointy knife isn't good for spreading butter. So I mean, you got to be, context is everything.
Context is everything. Great. So what single strategy are you best known for? Let's say in microfame media, because we've talked a lot about the book strategies for us to use. What about you? What are you best known for?
I mean, right now I'm known, I guess, for hype, for that word, for the bucket of 12 strategies. I mean, for a long time, I was known as that picking the fight with Gary Vaynerchuk guy. And then I went on to pick a fight with Simon Sinek, to pick a fight with Tony Robbins. Like, I'm very proud. Tony Robbins, PR people called Forbes to complain about me. And I got an email from Forbes, but it turned out everything in my article totally checked out. So there was nothing they could do. And he's like notoriously litigious, you know? So I kind of became this taker downer of like gurus, which I got known for.
The legend killer.
Yeah, people really love the milk before meat concept. I'm known for that. But I think I'm really happy because I think, especially with the release of the book, the interplay of the strategies has just sort of, I've kind of become known as the hype man. I'm like the new Flava Flav, you know what I mean?
Yeah, which is totally cool. Yeah,
I just need to get a big clock around my neck.
Big clock, maybe get a red jacket or something, you know, and all that. So how about your number one best strategy for 2021, 22 as we go in and start easing up into the one pandemic, going into another one, as the aliens start to invade us and reveal that they're the ones who came up with the RNA technology to save us from coronavirus and to potentially cure cancer.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So what about your thing that you're implementing? What are you doing now? What are you working on?
I'm well, in terms of strategies, I'm really working on, I mean, there's a lot of things I'm working on. I mean, I'm going out and teaching these concepts now that I can speak again. I'm really focused beyond the agency work on really spreading this message, because I do think it's important for, you know, I was really blown away by how many people lately have been conned by really bad ideas. And I'll just come out and say it. Our capital was stormed by people from our own country, and people are so scared by the charismatic leader at the center that they're pretending it didn't happen. Like, that bothers me a lot. And that's done through hype. So I think it's really important for me to go around and speak to and give workshops so that people, whether they're in large companies trying to make a change or small companies or causes or whatever, that those people can be armed to further and bring attention to good stuff, valuable stuff. So I want to get, I'm starting to get back on the speaking circuit and want to do more of that and working hard on that, workshops. In terms of strategies for me, something I'm working on, there's a strategy in the book called, it's packaging. I mean, there was a quote by the foremost experts of propaganda, propagandists and Arendt, and they say the essence of propaganda is a well-designed package. So we think of packaging as, packaging, like our logo or wrapping paper or whatever. But really what packaging means is that you figure out what you are and what you stand for, and you almost create a cartoon version of yourself. Like, you don't leave the house, you don't have one piece of thing out there that doesn't reflect that. Like, Andy Warhol never didn't have his white wig, he never spoke incomplete sentences when he went out of the house, maybe to his closest friends. His factory, was covered in tin foil and aluminum foil. Everything about him he used to say to his closest friends, sometimes I just really love getting home and taking off my Andy Warhol suit, because he knew you couldn't just show up to art openings dressed like Warhol and then be seen getting kitty litter. Which is funny that, Glenn Danzig, who was the singer of the Misfits, and Danzig, this Prince of Darkness guy, there's this picture that just went viral because he's coming out of a store holding kitty litter. That's why I thought of that. And it was so incongruous.
And to be fair, I've seen Marilyn Manson out of makeup.
Yeah, not a pretty sight.
And that was weird.
That's what I'm saying. But it's beyond that. It's kind of like I look at you, right? Like, I don't know what you're like in your daily life. And it's not just about clothing, but you wear a tie even when we're on a video thing, where a smoking jacket, and it's creating this image of yourself. So like, what I want to work on is becoming the hype man in everything I do, right? And I've not been as good at that as I should be, right? Like, my background here, I have these horror comics in the background, but what I really should have is pictures of all the hype artists I admire. I shouldn't be wearing this shirt right now. I should, everything about my presentation should be the equivalent of Andy Warhol's silver wig. And I think with the pandemic, I've let that slip a little, and I really want to hunker
I think
down.
a lot of people have let that slip during the pandemic, and I'm not always in a sometimes, like, if I do a live video, like if I'll go on Facebook or Instagram Live, I just, whatever I happen to be wearing, I don't go to any trouble. And
but again, it's not all about clothes, it's about all of it. Like, it's about the whole Andy Warhol give soundbite answers all the time. I mean, or Alfred Hitchcock, you could draw the little thing of him and you knew exactly who it is, right? I mean,
who it is.
He was Alfred Hitchcock.
And I am not necessarily an expert at this as you are. So there's things I'm working on now as I'm reading the book and getting stuff out of it. So I'll be making tweaks and modifications there without compromising, my identity and who I am.
This is my weakest one. Honestly, this is my weakest one. I have there have been periods in my life where I've been great at it, but you asked what I'm gonna, do going forward. This is my hype.
This is the
project, going forward, especially if I'm gonna be speaking and presenting myself as a public figure in that way.
And I have a couple suggestions when we're done that might be useful to put you together with some people I know. So let's finish off by how do we learn more about your proven process? In other words, I think the best thing for people to do is to go buy a copy of this book.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly the best thing.
Okay. So where can they get it? Where's the best place for them to get it? Amazon, bookshops?
Yeah, certainly Amazon is Amazon, right? I mean, you type the Hype Handbook in, the book comes to your door in a few days, and that's just the easiest way to do it, especially in a pandemic. Not every bookstore is carrying everything, although a lot of them are carrying this. But I'm a big supporter of bookstores, so if your bookstore does carry it, certainly buy it, and if not, order it. But selfishly, however that thing gets in your hand,
Yeah,
it'll help. We write
it's
things.
worth it.
We
It's
write
definitely
things for
worth
it
it.
to be written. So yeah, it'd be awesome.
It's
Yeah.
definitely worth it. It's why you're here. It's why I invited you here, because I first was one of your readers. I was first a fan,
Good.
and then I thought to reach out to you. What's the worst that could happen? You ignore or say no, and that's cool. But luckily you didn't, and
Yeah.
so here we are. So that's amazing. So I
Well, I'm
just
going to
wanted.
admire review. I looked into your stuff and it was so compelling. I wouldn't have said yes to everybody. So
Oh, well,
yeah,
that's quite an honor. So thank you
yeah.
so much for that. And also thank you very much for being here today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your experience, your stories, and
Thank you.
of yourself and your energy. So thank you so much. This has been Justin for Justin Answer. We are cultural creatives fulfilling our human potential. So don't forget to pick up your copy of the Hype Handbook so that you can protect yourself from these techniques, but also so that you can leverage and use them to further your own life, your career, whatever it is, in an honest and ethical way.